I like hot showers, and I like toilets, and I just like that. I'm comfortable with that. So many times, we go camping. Well, now we don't camp as much. We do a lot of day hikes. When we camped, my favorite cousin sometimes would go with us. Anybody have a favorite cousin? I had a favorite cousin. And he's the one I connected with. We had a lot in common. His name was Brian. Brian liked to go camping with us, or when he would go, it was great, because I knew it was going to be adventurous. He was from a small town country kid. He grew up in Wilsall, and he grew up in Whitehall. And he was involved in rodeo, and he had BB guns, and real guns, and horses, all that fun stuff. Our interests were so much different then than they are now for kids. But it was fun. He and his brothers, they lived in a small town, and I lived in the big city, or that's what Brian thought. Butte, the big city. But we had a lot in common. We did a lot of exploring, and hiking, and fishing, and shooting. And every time we get together, I'd be so excited because adventure was out there, and we were going to find it, or we were going to die trying. And adventure was out there. So one summer, we went to camp at Birch Creek, and Brian came along with us. And it was a pretty wet spring, and the summer was just as wet. And we were probably between 12 and 14. I can't remember exactly how old we were. And Birch Creek at that time was a beautiful place. It was full of trees and a beautiful creek. And it was close to mountain lakes. I think it's a Deer Head Lake is down out of Birch Creek. It's a little short hike up the mountain. And the great thing about it is on the creek, in some parts, there were these rock cliffs on either side. And that year, because it was so wet, the water was really raging down the creek. So you get a picture of where I'm at here in Birch Creek, and it's just white water the whole time. So we're camped there, and Brian and I had a great idea. We're just sitting around. We thought, hey, let's go make an obstacle course around this creek, especially around those cliffs and that white water. So it was raining that day, so we decided to do this. We're wet, the rocks are wet, the creek's really roaring down. Got a picture of that in your head now. And, there wasn't a slow section of that creek anywhere where we were camped. So we designed this obstacle course. We started out by walking along the bank of the creek, which really wasn't a bank. It was like a rock ledge, probably about 4 or 5 inches wide. And we got to hang onto the rocks to go into it. So we're walking along that. Pretty soon that wasn't catching our attention enough, so we decided we were going to change it. So we start turning up a notch, and we climb up these cliffs. We're getting every foothold you can find, and it's wet, and you're slipping, and we're having a good time. We're climbing up and down the faces of these cliffs right off the water. Then we'd sit and we'd see the water's really raging. We'd try and find rocks in the water you could jump to get across the creek. So we were doing that for a while. Then that kind of got boring. And Brian, he was a genius. He sees this old tree that's going across 2 of the rock cliffs, one on each side of the creek. It's stretched across the creek. When I'm little, you're looking down, it seems like it's 100 feet. It probably was 10 or 15. It wasn't that far. But, when you're younger, things look weird. Anyway, he gets this idea. We're going to walk across this log from one side of the creek to the other while the water's raging beneath us. When it's raining, the log's wet, the log is old, there's no bark on the log, and it's starting to rot. You can just see this tree. I'm like, okay. Well, I'm game, he's game. I really wasn't game, but I wouldn't let him believe that. So Brian gets the idea, we're going to do this. This is the next obstacle, we're going to cross the creek. So since it was his idea, he gets to go first. And I'm standing behind him watching, I'm just thinking, he's going to fall, and I'm going to laugh, he's going to fall right in the water. So he gets out and he starts walking across the log, and one of his feet slips, and he's catching his balance with his hands, and he must have got a revelation in his mind, maybe this isn't such a wise idea, walking, I'm not going to make it. So then he gets a better idea, and he drops down on the log, and he sits on it, and he swings around upside down with his legs and his arms, and he pulls himself upside down across the log to the other side. So he gets across there, and I'm watching him do this. And when he gets across, he gets over on the other side, and he gets up and he yells at me and goes, hey, it's your turn, come on. I said, well, okay. So I get down on the log, and I sit down with my sitter, and I start scooting across, and he's like, you can't do it that way. You got to do it the way I did it. I'm just thinking, here we go. He was going to have none of that. So I'm up against the wall here. I either do it or I die and get soaking wet. I didn't think it was so funny watching him slip now that I had to go upside down across that log. So I swung underneath and got upside down, and I made it across. I get across the log, across to the other side. And so there Brian and I are on the other side. We're feeling pretty proud of ourselves. We made it across this creek on the log. What we didn't remember was the campsite was on the other side, so we had to go back again. So we did it again. And the whole time the water's raging below us, and we thought, hey, it's like 100 feet down, it was probably 10. So we get back to the campground. We start telling our parents what we were doing. I mean, we were excited about it. It was adventurous. They didn't seem to share our enthusiasm. They weren't really as excited as we were. I'm looking at them and I'm seeing worry and fear on their faces, and I'm thinking, what's wrong? I remember my father had this particular expression. He would look at me, and without saying a word, he'd say, son, you don't even have a brain in your head. And so we saw adventure and excitement. What my parents and his parents were seeing was drowning, broken bones, hospital bills, and funerals. We didn't see that. I was wondering why they did. Now I kind of know it's age, wisdom, and life experience, but I didn't know that then. But when you think about that little obstacle course we made, there was real danger there. Because we could have fell and broke a bone, we could have died, we could have drowned. They could have had hospital bills as a result of our obstacle course. But we didn't let fear stop us from trying it, and we weren't worried about the consequences. We didn't think about it. And if you let me, I'll share another Brian story that's kind of relates to this topic. When Brian and his brothers and sister lived in Whitehall, they lived in a place, if you're familiar with Whitehall, if you go on the old highway, there was a place called Celeste's Greenhouse. And they lived on a place just south of that. They rented out there. So we'd go out there in the summer. Right? We spent a lot of time out there. And we'd go shooting and horseback riding and hiking and fishing and all that kind of fun stuff that we did when we were younger. And Brian, like I told you before, he had BB guns and he had real guns and horses. When I was younger, my parents would never buy me a BB gun. Couldn't figure that out. But when I was 12, they bought me a .22 rifle. It was an ultra-high, single shot. We got it at Woolworths for $30. I still remember it. As a matter of fact, I traded that for $50 for another gun one day. That's how it all started, Chrissy. So, I was always puzzled by it. They wouldn't give me a BB gun. Until I was older and realized that Dad knew I couldn't get away with shooting a .22 rifle in town, but I could get away with shooting a BB gun in town. So he had some wisdom. As a matter of fact, the first BB gun I ever bought, I was 18 years old. And I went to Woolworths and bought a BB gun. And Dad was right, because the first thing I did with it was shoot out a car window. He knew better. But I was 18 now, so I could go to jail. It was a different moment. Anyway, back to the Brian story. Anyway, this summer, I don't remember how old I was. I was younger. I had my .22 rifle, and I go over to Whitehall and spend about a week there. And so Brian had an older brother named Brent. He's a couple years older, and he had a truck. And so Brent and Brian and I would take his truck, and we drive out onto the bench. And if you know anything about the bench in Whitehall, it's kind of southwest of there. There was a big prairie area at that time. Nobody lived there. It was just inundated with gophers. So we go out to the bench. We spent 3 days out there, and we decided we were going to have a contest to see who could shoot the most gophers. And we kept a tally. And after 3 days, we figured out we shot about 900 gophers, give or take 100. We ran out of bullets. We didn't have any more money. We couldn't buy any more bullets. That's why we had to stop. And we kept going. But anyway, if you've ever been out on the bench, it's full of gullies and ravines. And so we were out there shooting gophers all over the place. I remember one ran up to me, he was about 3 feet away. I couldn't believe it. Just looking at me, and I missed it. I shot at it and missed. So we're shooting through these ravines, and I'm on one side of a ravine, and Brian is on the other. And there's gophers alongside of me, and there's gophers alongside him. We're shooting back and forth across the ravine with .22 rifles at these gophers.
Oh my!
I can still remember, clear as a bell, those bullets whizzing past my head. I'm thinking, that's just crazy. That story I never shared with my parents. And for the obvious reason, they would have taken my .22 rifle. We couldn't have that. Anyway, I share those to illustrate the point about worry and fear and how it changes in our lives the older we get. Kids do goofy things, right? Sometimes they do dangerous things. Because number one, kids don't know any better, and they don't worry about the consequences. And because they have little or no fear. You know, think about little kids that climb up on cabinets and jump off. And we used to climb up on an old shed that they had across the street, jumping off the shed to see who could jump the farthest out into the dirt. I know it was probably a 6-foot shed or something from the roof or jumping off. Kids don't think about getting hurt. So fear isn't a big concern. Kids make a decision to do something, they do it. They don't bother thinking about the consequences like injuries or damaged property. If it's going to hurt someone else, they just do it. Like hanging upside down over a rotting log, crossing over raging water, or shooting at gophers next to your cousin, or even out in front of your house in the middle of winter, grabbing onto the bumper of a car, letting it pull you down the street. Don't do it when mom's watching. That's a big mistake. I made that mistake. So, with kids, you know, it looks fun, sounds fun, so why not try? And the point I make with those stories is that worry and fear didn't stop us from doing some of those things then, when maybe it should have. But then why should worry and fear stop us from doing things much less dangerous now, things that God calls us to do?